a group of people from UCC and from the communities of Carrick Tool and Passage West, all who are interested in biodiversity, come up with interesting projects they can work on. And one such idea that has come about is to do a project on signature trees. So here we are now in Carrick Tool, kickstarting the project. I'm William from SECAD's Wildwork Initiative, and today I'm in Carrick Tool and I'm on the lookout for special trees. And what I noticed in this park, it mightn't look significant to many people, but it's this small tree, but when you look closer it's actually quite old. So I think it's significant, and we're going to find out a little bit why in a second. Now today I'm here with two other people.
Hi, I'm Alan O'Connor. I'm from Carrick Tool, live just down the road. I'm a local councillor as well with Cork County Council, and I have a particular interest in all matters environmental. So I'm here to help Will to find those signature trees of Carrick Tool, and I think this might be one of those trees.
And we were also with Owen Latisse from UCC. Would you like to introduce yourself, Owen?
Hi, I'm Owen Latisse from UCC, from the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Science. I'm a plant scientist, so I'm interested in urban trees and trees in general. And today, as William said, we're looking at significant trees, why they're significant, and can we measure their significance in some way? Can we measure their height? Can we measure their contribution to the environment? So that's what we're doing today.
We're hoping this will turn into a project that everyone in the community in Carrick Tool can get involved in. So in our video today, Alan, Owen and I, we're going to get to grips with how you would survey these trees. We're going to talk a little bit about why they are significant. So in a minute, Owen is going to show us how you can measure trees. But right now, Alan, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on why you think this could be a significant tree.
Well, if you look around, you were in a housing estate that was probably built, well, I know it was built in the last 15 years, and this tree massively predates that. So as a relic of the old fields which were here before that time, before the housing estate was built, I think this tree is significant, particularly in the context of this very localized area for the people, as a reminder of perhaps what was here before they were. So it's quite an old tree, it's an oak tree, and for that reason I think it is quite a significant tree.
Okay, so one of the key measurements that we might want to get when we look at a significant tree is to get an estimate of its height. So to get the actual height, we might need to chop the tree down and measure it, or climb up to the very top and measure it, which I can't recommend. But what we can do is get a fairly good estimate using what's known as the pencil method or the biro method. So what you need is somebody to help you. So Alan is standing next to the tree at the moment, and Alan just tucks right in as close as he can to the tree. Okay, so one of the things that the simplest thing you can do is you can ask Alan his height. Alan, how tall are you?
About 5'11".
5'11". So you know Alan is 5'11". So at the very least you can estimate how many Allens is that tree high. So from here it's about 2.5 times that. So multiply 2.5 by 5'11", convert it to meters if you want, and you've got your height. You can also use the pencil method, which just means using the pencil, stretch out your hand and estimate where on the pencil. The top of the pencil is at the top of Alan's head, the bottom of the pencil is at his feet, or I can put my thumb where his feet are, and then I know that this pen is 1 Allen tall, and I can use that then to go 1, 2, 2.5. I can use this as a simple measuring device, and we know it's about 2.5 times Allen. So that's a very simple, quick, painless method of measuring the height of the tree. One of the other measurements you can take when you're looking at what you think is a significant tree is what's called its DBH, its diameter at breast height. So the reason we're using this height is that it's a common thing that we all have in common, that roughly speaking, it's if you went to hug the tree, that's where you're going to measure its diameter. Okay, to do that, remember its diameter is the distance across the circle. So what we can do is we can measure its circumference and then convert that into its diameter. So one of the ways of doing that is take a very simple measuring tape, pick a point on the tree at around breast height, as I said, pick a point and just keep going around in a straight line. And even if you run out of tape, you can still come back to your starting point. So just mark it with your finger or get a friend to help, and then keep going with the rest of the tape. So that's about 48, 49 plus the first length of tape, which is 150 centimeters, gets you to about 198. And I've done this already, because 198 divided by 3.14 is equal to about 63 centimeters. So you know, if the circumference is 198, you divide it by 3.14, it's always 3.14, that doesn't change, and that gives you about 63 centimeters for the diameter of that tree. The reason that's important is that we can use that as well as the species, which is oak. We can use that diameter plus the species name to put that into a simple website that will give us an estimate of the tree's age. Okay, it is just an estimate, and it will depend on the growing conditions, how healthy the tree is, how healthy the tree has been for its lifetime, and so on. But it is a fairly good estimate of the age of that tree. It's even better than the height. Okay, so that it's the number of, you know, if we cut down that tree, you'd see the rings inside, and you know, lots of people know about counting the rings of the tree. Well, that diameter gives you an estimate of that as well. So that's one of the other measurements you can take quickly and easily and record it as you're looking at your significant trees. One of the key things we'll need you to do as well is to try and identify what type of tree we're looking at. Some of them are obvious, but may not be obvious to everybody. Okay, this is an oak behind me. We can tell that by the shape of the leaves, the fact that there are acorns on the ground, and so on. But if you're stuck, if you can't identify it, if somebody you know can't identify it, there are some really good books that we can point you towards. There's some really good apps and websites. There's apps for your phone that will take a picture of the tree and will identify it for you. We'll put those links in a document to go with this video, so you won't be on your own. And if you're stuck after all of that, then come and talk to us, and we'll try our best to identify it for you.
The other thing we're looking at is significance factors, and there are three main factors of significance that we would like people to look out for. One of these is the aesthetic value of the tree, whether people think it's a particularly beautiful tree, for example. The other is its biodiversity value. So if people think it's important for biodiversity reasons, like does it support a lot of wildlife? And the other one is its historical or cultural significance. Maybe it's a tree that lots of children in the local area play on, or maybe it was planted by a famous person, or maybe for other historical or cultural reasons that it is significant. So for this specimen here, Owen and Alan are going to speak to us about those three categories and say why they think the tree may or may not be significant under each of the categories. So Alan, you were actually speaking a little bit about this tree's significance already, so I might ask you to elaborate a little bit on the biodiversity angle.
Well, in terms of biodiversity, it's an oak tree, a pedunculate oak, we think. So it's a native species, and oak trees as a native species support a lot of wildlife, a lot of endemic species. We've seen some lichen on the tree already, acorns on the ground, and if you've ever seen a jay around, they're a very colourful bird related to the crow. They'd be feasting on those acorns. So from a biodiversity point of view, oak trees in themselves are very important.
What do you think?
Yeah,
Anything else?
I think it ticks the box from a biodiversity point of view, just about. It is native. It's not a large oak by any means, so there's a limit to how much food and how much it can contribute to the environment. There's a limit to how much carbon it can sequester and so on. But it just about ticks the box, particularly because it's a native tree. From an aesthetic point of view, my own view is that it's not particularly aesthetically pleasing. It clearly has a story to tell, but at the moment it looks a bit shook. So maybe it doesn't tick the aesthetic box, but it certainly ticks the biodiversity box. And the third one is the historic context. Clearly this has a history. It's made a contribution over the years to its environment. It continues to make a contribution. It's an interesting focal point in the community. So it's ticking a couple of those boxes, and I would agree this is a significant tree.
Alan, do you think anything else on those?
Well, I think obviously these categories are all subjective, so it's up to the individual themselves to make the case on whether or not they think a tree is significant or otherwise and make that argument. Owen has just mentioned the aesthetic qualities, and I suppose if you were being generous, you'd say this tree has a lot of character to it. It's not, classically beautiful, it's not particularly tall and symmetrical. But from the other point of view, I think it does have a quality to it in terms of it looks a little bit broken down. It's decayed. There's only a little bit of it alive yet. I think that brings a certain aesthetic quality to speak to us about the passage of time and the things that were here beforehand. So as a ruin almost of a tree, I think it does have a good aesthetic quality.
So there you go. People might even think differently about whether it's got beauty or not. It's in the eye of the beholder. So when people are surveying these trees, you may come across other interesting things about the tree that aren't included as part of the survey. So you'll be able to let us know about those things that come up also. So Owen here has noticed something interesting about this tree.
Yeah, I think this tree is interesting for lots of reasons. I think when you're surveying a tree, have a look at the landscape around it. And I think around here it looks as if the ground has been built up around this tree. Maybe when the surrounding houses were being built and so on. So I think this tree may be a bit taller than it looks right now, because I think the ground is built up around it. That's just my suspicion, but I think that's the kind of thing that might be worth noting and adding to a comment section as you're surveying your trees.
So we're looking at a number of other significant trees today, and Alan has brought us here to Coolord.
Yes, so I'm here in Coolord Housing Estate in Carrick Tool, and the tree you can see on the horizon, quite a substantial tree, is a beech tree. And obviously, judging by the size of it, it's quite an old tree and it predates the housing estate. When I was younger, you used to be able to play in here. It was an abandoned quarry, and that tree was always a point of reference as the largest and most significant tree in the area.
I have not actually seen this tree before, and when I see a tree like this, as someone who's not from Carrick Tool, I get excited because it's an amazing specimen of a tree, and we don't see too many trees like this in communities around Ireland. Yeah, we've lots of significant trees of this sort of nature around the country, but if on a community level, they're few and far between, and you really have to get close to this tree just to appreciate how special it is. Obviously it's appreciated by, I assume, young people in the area, still play here quite a lot. But just the trunk and the shape of the tree and the way it snarls, oh. What do you think of it, Owen?
It's a great tree. It's not a typical beech tree. Beech trees tend to be kind of straight up, and this is a bit curved and a bit all over the place, which is great, which means it's different and it's iconic and it's even more interesting. It's clearly a remnant of some other activity that was here before this relatively modern housing estate, but it's great that it's still at the heart of this community, at the heart of this housing estate, and clearly a great tree for playing on, for a focal point for people living around here.
Yeah, so when I come to this tree, I think back to my youth, I suppose, as a younger child coming in here and exploring this quarry. And some things don't change, I suppose, and that's one of the things about trees I like, is that they live for so long that, you know, they speak to a great depth of time in our communities. They have that continuity with the past, and I think that this tree, as you know, attractive as it is in its own right, as a beech tree, as a specimen tree, it speaks to the community and to the history of our community as well, and some things just don't change.
Exactly the same method applies to measuring this tree as it does to any other tree. It's got a particularly large diameter, clearly. So if you've got a longer measuring tape than I have, that would be great. Where do you measure its diameter? Well, it's at breast height, remember. So I think you've got to get up close to it, and you've got to measure it where it is one distinct trunk, as opposed to trying to measure all of these individual bits that are down at the bottom. So I think something like this is the perfect place to measure DBH right around the tree. As I said, you can even get a piece of rope or string and do it that way, and then measure the piece of rope or string if that's easier as well. From a height perspective, same method applies. Just move backwards, get someone to stand right next to the tree who you know their height, and then do your adding up as you go.
And if you want to discover hidden secrets in terms of the tree's significance, it's worth spending a bit of time with the tree and seeing how many things you can notice. So for instance, down here, we just noticed that there's remnants of what looks like an old stone wall. Actually, you could perhaps best describe this old stone wall as being encapsulated within the tree now. That's the age of tree we're talking about here. And when you come around to the back of this tree, you really get a sense of how old it is. It's got this immensely thick base. I might ask Alan to come in here, and you'll see how thick the tree is just in comparison to a person.
This is a quarry, now obviously not in use because the houses are here, that's just to the north of the village, and from which I think Carrick Tool derives its name. So Carrick Tool means the rock of Tool. Tool either being perhaps a chieftain's name, or some people think it might mean sinistral or left-handed, maybe to do with the unusual way in which the rocks are aligned. I'm not sure, that's been lost to the history of time, to be honest. But yeah, a historical area for Carrick Tool, definitely.
If we come in close to the tree and look at the bark, we can see that there's lots of, some people might call it tree art, now it's so old, or it might be called graffiti or vandalism, depending on your viewpoint. But it's very hard to make out what any of this says anymore because it's so old. But you can see there's an O in there and an F. Perhaps there was something else. And you can go all around this tree and find little symbols and letters like this. Undoubtedly, people did it just having a bit of fun, being playful, maybe when they were kids, perhaps 100 years ago or more. So I would certainly say this tree is very culturally or historically significant. And what a wonderful thing to be able to speak about. Many people give young people a hard time saying that they are wrecking nature and they don't care about trees and whatever else, but here's a great way to engage people with, you know, graffiti perhaps as a talking point. So we've come over near Barry's Cork Castle, and Owen and I are going for a walk down here on Alan's recommendation, because he said there are a lot of significant trees. So we're just going to walk along and talk about what we see. The first tree here is a big old oak, has wonderful form, but from the biodiversity angle I think this is very special, because you see that the tree has an immense carpet of ivy around its base. Between the base of the tree right up to the crown, loads of ivy. Right now at this time of the year that ivy is on flower, and it's providing a really important end of year food source to pollinators. When we come up close, you see that there's loads of insects buzzing around in it. What do you think of this one, Owen?
Yeah, I think the presence of insects, and you can see them, you can almost hear them buzzing around, is an obvious sign of the biodiversity value of not just the tree but the ivy growing up it. The ivy isn't doing any harm to the tree. The tree is big enough to support it, and yeah, it's a special tree, but it's added to by the biodiversity value.
So yeah, the ivy is still in flower. Hopefully you can see the insects, wasps and bees flying around there. But what's starting to happen now also is that it's gone past flowering. We're starting to get the fruit coming out, and that'll be ripe then for birds to be able to eat. Very start of the next coming year, when they'll be desperate for food. So I mean, ivy is a really important species of plant because it gives late food source and early food source, and this oak tree, certainly the ivy appears to be an integral part of it, and the oak and ivy together are providing an amazing habitat for wildlife. And as we've walked down along this road from the oak we were just at, there's another 1, 2, 3, 4 oaks, all pretty much as impressive as each other, and they continue on down the tree-lined road towards Barry's Cork Castle. And then here we have a sycamore. It's not a native tree to Ireland, but for something that's non-native, it is reported to be quite good in terms of its biodiversity value. But this actually doesn't look like a tree, it looks like a number of trees all together. But you have to come in close to this tree and then you realise that at some point the tree was cut down, most likely. And when it was cut, individual new branches sprung up, and they over time formed into separate trunks. So there's actually 4 main ones in here together in a clump, and then there's one that goes off as what we call a side tree now, I suppose, rather than a side branch. And you can see, as part of hedge cutting works, that even out here we have branches that would have been cut. You can see then how, as a result of that, fresh emergent growth comes out. So many years ago, that's what happened. This tree was cut down and big limbs have now grown up in place.
Now, as a visitor to Carrick Tool, I'm really struck by the collection of old trees, particularly oaks, leading up to Barry's Cork Castle. They're clearly not just any oaks, they're associated with the castle, they're part of an approachway for the castle. So in terms of their historical importance, they're absolutely ticking the box.
And one of the reasons Owen and I came down here was Alan had heard, he doesn't know if it's true or not, but there are local reports that there used to be a banshee tree down here near Barry's Cork Castle. Now I'm assuming a banshee tree might be perhaps an old hawthorn that the people had placed importance on. It could have been very significant spiritually. There might be really interesting local traditions to do with this banshee tree, if there is actually a banshee tree down here, and or if it actually still exists. So we're not finding all the significant trees today, we're just doing an initial exploration. But certainly if you know any information about trees, stories about trees, where there's really cool or interesting trees, be they might be on your own property, in your own garden, ones you've planted. I mean, anything at all that you think is special about trees in Carrick Tool as part of this survey, we'd love if you could let us know about it. We've just stepped a little bit off the road, and the species mix of trees down here has changed a bit. So in places with big old oaks, there's a lot of big old ash trees. Some really lovely ones close to Barry's-Court Castle. And then Owen and I were struck by these 3 separate trees. There's 2 of them. They're mighty trees. They could easily be 100 years old, if not more. There's the 3rd one. And they appear to be some sort of a species of poplar. We're not exactly sure what they are. But again, that's okay, because any of us who are involved in this survey, it's not about knowing everything about all these trees. It's just about tuning into what's around you and trying to find real interesting special trees and put in whatever information into the survey you can. If there's any missing bits, we can go back and get them afterwards if needs be.
Okay, well, I've had a great time looking around at some of the significant trees here around Carrick Tool. I think this is a great project to be involved with. Our trees are a great asset for our communities. They frame our communities, they add immense value in terms of biodiversity, in terms of the aesthetic value, in terms of the carbon sequestration, mitigating the effects of climate change. Trees are fantastic, and we need people to begin to survey them and to tell us where the significant trees are, why they're significant for whatever reason, and you can be a part of that. So I'd encourage you to be a part of this project. They're your trees, they're our trees, and go out and find great trees and tell us about them.
So this project of recording our significant trees, it's very important. And one of the reasons why is that if any of these trees are lost, if you wanted to replace them in terms of planting new trees, you've got to plant a lot of new trees to be able to make up for the loss of a 100 or a 200-year-old tree. And planting trees is wonderful. Lots of people know that. Tree planting is a popular activity, and you often might hear about it in the context of climate change. We need to plant trees, plant more forestry. But if you think about it from an ecological perspective, if you lose a tree around Carrick Tool that's 100, 200, 300 years old, the reality is you may need to plant 100, 200, 300, maybe even 1,000 saplings to make up for that, because those trees have to survive and grow into their old age too to become as valuable as the tree that you've just lost. And it's my feeling personally that we aren't recognizing how important our existing trees are in terms of their biodiversity importance, their climate change importance, and so on. So that's one of the rationales behind this project. So planting trees is wonderful and we absolutely encourage it, but saving the existing trees is just as important, if not maybe even more important. So I commend anyone who gets involved in this to help us to place importance on these signature trees. And in doing so, at least it might help to preserve them, because often signature trees, when they are being lost, it's because no one is realizing just how important they are. So we want to place importance on our trees in Carrick Tool, in Cork, in Ireland, so that we can preserve them for future. We've come over to the industrial estate for a look also, because just yesterday evening had a quick look on Google Maps to see was there any interesting trees around Carrick Tool. And there are lots of trees in the industrial estate, many of which were planted as part of its development, but I thought I noticed something in this area, And sure enough, I had. It was hard to tell on Google Maps when you just looked down on the canopy. But we have 3 lovely specimens here also. We have an alder, which is the first one in front of me. Native tree. An oak. Another native. And a sycamore behind it. 3 magnificent trees, especially that oak. And obviously their significance was noticed by others in the past, because they have been retained after the industrial estate's development.
So we'd be delighted if as many people in the community as possible could get involved with this project, looking for the significant trees in Carrick Tool. And if you'd like to get involved, please get in touch with the local biodiversity group.